Hey, welcome. Let's talk about feminism. You hear that word everywhere, right? It's in the news, all over social media, and pretty much every political debate. But for a word that seems so straightforward, what it actually means, well, that's where things get complicated and, honestly, pretty misunderstood.
So, what is feminism really? Is it one single idea? A political movement? A philosophical argument? The truth is, it's kind of all of the above and then some. In this explainer, we're going to peel back the layers of this really complex and fascinating ideology to try and get to the heart of it. So let's dive in. All right, so where do we even start? Let's begin with the one foundational idea that, at least in theory, is supposed to unite all feminists, even when they disagree on basically everything else. Let's talk about the core mission.
Okay, and it's hard. This is it. Feminism is about looking at how women are oppressed and then trying to do something about it, to end it. Simple enough, right? Well, not so fast. This definition, it's really just the tip of the iceberg. The real story and all the controversy is in the massive debates over how exactly you're supposed to achieve that goal. And that right there is where all the fractures start to appear.
To really get a handle on those fractures, you need a quick historical map. The first truly systematic feminist argument is usually traced way back to Mary Wollstonecraft in 1792. That lit the fuse for what we now call the first wave, a huge push for basic stuff like the right to vote and own property. Then, fast forward to the 1960s and bam, the second wave explodes. This wasn't just about laws anymore, it was about social and cultural inequality. That was followed by a third wave, which was all about individualism and diversity. And that led to this whole new way of thinking that started questioning the very ideas feminism was built on in the first place.
So how did all these different waves lead to such different ideas? Well, one way to look at it is to break things down into three major blueprints, or schools of thought. Each one has a totally different diagnosis for the problem of women's oppression, and because of that, a radically different solution.
And this table right here, it lays out the ideological battleground perfectly. First up, you've got liberal feminists. For them, the problem is simple, an irrational denial of rights. So the solution is to reform the laws. Makes sense. Then you have socialist feminists. They say, hold on, it's not just the laws, it's the whole economic system of capitalism. For them, you can't have liberation without a full-blown economic revolution. And finally, you have radical feminists who say the problem is even deeper than that. They call it patriarchy, a pervasive system of male dominance. And their solution? A complete social and cultural teardown and rebuild. I mean, three totally different diagnoses leading to three totally different paths.
But believe it or not, the disagreements don't stop there. Not even close. Even inside these different schools, feminists have been wrestling with these huge fundamental philosophical questions that are still shaping the movement today. So yeah, let's peel back another layer.
Okay, this one is huge. It's one of the biggest tensions inside feminism. Should the goal be equality, aiming for a world where men and women are treated exactly the same because we share a common humanity? Or should the goal be to celebrate difference, to argue that unique female qualities should be a source of pride, not something to be erased by assimilating into male norms? So is the fight for sameness, or is it for the recognition of a valuable, powerful difference? It's a really fundamental split.
And that brings us to another critical debate, sex versus gender. Feminist thinkers drew this really sharp line between sex, the biological reality, and gender, the social roles we're all assigned. The basic idea is that society takes your biological sex and just attaches a whole instruction manual of rules and expectations to it. That's how we get masculinity and femininity. Now, this distinction is incredibly powerful because it lets you argue that a lot of what seems natural is actually just socially constructed. And if it's constructed, it can be deconstructed, it can be changed.
And now, we get to the deepest, most mind-bending layer of all. Just when feminism seemed to be sorting out its core concepts, a whole new wave of thinkers came along and basically started questioning everything. And I mean everything, including the very words feminists were using, like the category of woman itself.
This quote from the philosopher Jean-François Lyotard really gets to the heart of this postmodern challenge. A meta-narrative? What's that? Well, just think of it as a big, overarching story that claims to explain everything, like a religion or a grand political theory, a one story to rule them all. Postmodern thinkers got really suspicious of these grand stories, and eventually, they turned that suspicion on feminism itself. They started asking, is feminism, with its own story of oppression and liberation, just another big story that needs to be questioned? The main tool they used for all this questioning was something called deconstruction. And this slide breaks down how it works.
First, you find all the pairs of opposites that our thinking is built on, like male-female or reason-emotion. Second, you show how one of those is always seen as better or superior, like reason is valued over emotion. Third, you argue that this isn't just about words. This hierarchy actually props up real-world power structures. And that leads to the final explosive step. If our language itself is biased, then can a word like woman even have one single, stable meaning? For a lot of these thinkers, the answer was no.
So, after all of these intense intellectual battles, from just trying to define the mission to taking apart the very language of the movement, where in the world does that leave feminism today? So where are we now? Well, one term you might hear thrown around is post-feminism. Now, this doesn't mean feminism is over, or that all its goals have been magically achieved. Not at all. It's more the idea that so many of feminism's core principles have gone mainstream. They're just baked into our policy debates and social conversations now that the nature of the movement itself has fundamentally changed.
And this, right here, brings us to the central paradox of modern feminism. On the one hand, you could say it's been wildly successful. I mean, you can't have a serious policy discussion today without considering its impact on gender. Feminist scholarship is a totally respected field in academia. But on the other hand, that unified, active political movement that was so visible in the 20th century, it's largely faded from public view. It's so strange. In a way, the ideology won, but the movement itself kind of vanished.
Which leaves us with this final, really provocative question to chew on. We've seen feminism go from a pretty simple mission to this incredibly complex web of competing ideas and internal debates. We've seen its ideas become part of our social fabric. So has its very success transformed it into something completely new? Or maybe, just maybe, has it made the movement as we once knew it obsolete? Something to think about.